Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Connecting Dots podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Usama. Today, we are very happy to be joined by Kevin Stoodley, all the way from Toronto, Canada. He's currently working in the capacity of a CTO for IBMC, and he's been with the company for about 3 decades now. So, in the upcoming conversation, we'll not only get to have a conversation with him about his different key learnings and the different positions that he's been through, but we'll also get to talk to him about his reflections and maybe some possible advices from what he has to say for early career professionals. So, with that, stay tuned and we'll get started with the conversation. Kevin, thank you so much once again for being here with us. And how had your day been so far?
Oh, it's been great. Thank you, Osama. It's really great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, first of all, Kevin, tell me about the 35 years that you've been with IBM. I remember when I was a kid, even in school, our school books used to have references about IBM and how they made the initial computers. So, give us a brief rundown of how this journey had been and how do you see this technical evolution over 3 decades?
Wow, that's a big ask. So, if I roll myself back to when I was just finishing graduate work that I was doing, I was looking around for a job, and I started out at a very small consulting firm, and very quickly got into a situation where, um, let's just say the firm thought they had a contract that they didn't actually have, and they ended up not getting it, and so they let their implementation team go. And so I worked for 1 month, and then was told, "Sorry, we don't have any work for you." So they were, I think, maybe regretting that they had told me that they had a contract they really didn't have, and perhaps knowing that I had a family full of lawyers, they gave me 2 months' salary for 1 month work. So I can't really complain about that. I had no right to that under the labor laws, or even under the most generous, I think, employment agreements. But in any case, I started looking around, and I at first I thought that the local IBM lab here, I had gone to the University of Toronto, and the local IBM lab, I had heard many times that it wasn't doing very interesting work. It was just sort of contract work, overflow work, whatever other labs that were more mainstream and IBM had, that they couldn't quite complete. IBM Toronto lab would compete for, and that actually turned out not to be the case. And they had some deep mission work, in compilers primarily, and database software. And I had some interest in compilers, and I went and interviewed, and I hit it off with the people that interviewed me, and I started I would say, maybe the first golden age of my career, where I was with a very small number of people who had also largely just been hired. Maybe one was there 2 months longer than I had been. We were sort of put on our own little project to create an optimizing compiler backend for a bunch of different languages in a day. And I won't go back into those technical details, but it was a blank page kind of opportunity, and you don't get those very often. As I learned later, I didn't really know that was my first introduction to working, in industry, and it was just a great experience. And I became connected into the sort of broad endeavor that IBM does through that, because if you're working on the back end of the compiler, you're talking to the people who are designing CPUs, and really getting into deep software design issues as well as hardware. And that really set me up quite well for the rest of my career, sort of unbeknownst to me. And I had mostly a software background in school, although I did a lot of VLSI work during my master's. So, rolling fast forward, I guess, I really immersed myself in that project, and it was more like a personal contributor kind of role, but I got more and more scope and more responsibilities, and made more and more connections in IBM. And IBM's a pretty big place. Even now, it's smaller than it used to be in some ways, because we've divested of our outsourcing business. But it's still, a couple 100,000 people, geographically very dispersed around the world. The largest industrial research, team in the world by a lot. And so it's a very diverse and interesting place. In fact, it's easy to get lost within IBM itself and not even think about the outside world.
Hmm.
But then, as time went on, I got, as I said, more responsibility, and things like Java, became interesting. And I was at the sort of ground floor of the interest in Java within IBM, and so I took on the job of implementing and designing our JIT technology in our own JVM that we had created. And that sort of set me up for a lot of advancement in IBM, and a lot of influence. And I ended up becoming an IBM fellow in 2004 for that for that work and won some corporate awards. So all along the way, kind of just getting more and more responsibility and developing just more and more depth, but adjacent depth in my field of interest. And then things took, I would say, quite a right turn for me after I became an IBM fellow. I got asked to become the CTO of a set of tools where I had nothing to do with the creation of these tools. And so I think it's one thing to become an expert in a field or an area of endeavor where you yourself have been a deep practitioner and have sort of grown up around the technology and particularly the implementation that you're working on. It's very much another one to reinvent yourself as being an equivalently knowledgeable and influential person on a set of technologies that you've really had nothing to do with the creation of, and that you just kind of are parachuted in from the top to say, could you look after this stuff too? And so that was a really formative event for me because I had a lot of, I guess, breadth in my education, but I hadn't really had to exercise much of that in my technical career at IBM. And so suddenly I was thrust into doing that a lot, and in anger, as they say, and and I got these ever increasing roles. Eventually, I became the CTO of all of the Rational brand in IBM, which is responsible for the developer experience. It was an acquisition we had made, and then we turned into a brand surrounding the developer experience, and that again, taught me the importance of succession planning, which doesn't happen very often. I find, I'm not sure about in academia, but in industry, I find it's a very rare event. So again, I got dumped into a job because one guy just decided to up and leave, and he sort of got sick of doing that job. And he was more or less the same age as me, and I never expected to take over from him. But and he was another IBM fellow, but I did so, and again that really galvanized in me an interest in a broader set of technology initiatives and a more strategic, customer-focused kind of set of interactions. While at the same time, I was still working a lot with IBM Research and other development teams, and that sort of blossomed into the overall CTO-ship for the IBM Z brand, which is a hardware and software business, a very large business of IBM's. People will mostly know that as the mainframe, and like the famous quote, rumors of my death are exaggerated. The mainframe has been predicted to die out many times, but in fact, it's having the renaissance, the heyday of its lifetime, and the most recent programs. Certainly, while I've been CTO, are three of the most successful in the whole history of the program. So it's a very exciting time to be working on that platform. Not without its challenges, but a very exciting time. And all along the way, I really got involved a lot in career progression, in helping people understand how to advance their careers, in being on promotion review boards at different levels, even at the executive level. And so that became a passion of mine in really helping people navigate the very complicated waters, especially in a large company like IBM, of how do you become the next level, even do you want to become the next level? So maybe I'll stop there. There's lots of things happen in my personal life along the way too.
Since you came from an engineering background, so like what were some of the positions that really got you interested in them? Like, you had to build a business understanding, but how was that transition for you when you were developing or adding these new skill sets to your portfolio?
Right. Well, I always had an interest in business, in fact, and I got that interest, I would say, in undergraduate school in EngSci at U of T. We took a course on engineering economics. It was mostly basic economic theory, but I quite dug into that course and really enjoyed it. So I'd say that was the kernel of the start of it. But it's interesting when you're in academia. There's a certain perspective around innovation for innovation's sake, or technology for technology's sake. And so in the pure research world, although people think about the business impact of technology, it's not necessarily so relevant, and it's not a gate for you. In industry, rather the opposite. Despite the fact that IBM has a gigantic investment in pure research, for the most part, all of the work that we do is technology for business value's sake. And if you don't get that from working with an IBM, you sure will get that from talking to your first client when you start to try to, you can sort of geek out and nerd appeal them a little bit, but as soon as you try to
Yeah.
talk to them about some kind of innovation or a patent you've worked on or some kind of technical advancement that they don't see the immediate business value of, they will bust you and they will bust you quick on it. And so you will see the stark difference in their level of interest in stuff that will make their lives easier, that will make their business more successful, etc., compared to stuff that they see as really six of one, half a dozen the other, or ultimately technology for technology's sake. And so, it's kind of a necessary learning that you go through, even if you don't bring a perspective and interest in business. If you're really going to, I think, be successful in that industrial context for technology, even though IBM is a pure technology company at some level, you better get that right deep into your bones and right quick, because your success there, I'm sure there are exceptions, but your success there is really based on getting that and applying that lens and that filter on all the cool ideas that come across your desk.
um, since you came or you were hailing from a pure technical background, so then you transition into management. So I want you to talk a little bit about what are some of the key business aspects that the people transitioning to management from engineering should educate themselves about, and which are maybe necessary to understand how the money is flowing in between organizations and really helping the technology to accelerate.
I mean, the annual reports are a good start. I mean, I think Warren Buffett has a superpower for reading them. Apparently, I think it's a struggle for most people to grok what's going on there. But you can read the text at least, and I think a couple of business courses probably do well. I think um, an engineering degree with an MBA actually can be a very powerful combination, although it's quite an investment in your time to get that. I didn't do that, but I think the main thing came from my own interest to understand, for example, in our products, why our go-to-market was what it was, why were we doing these things, and to try to actually deeply understand them. Things like if you start talking to clients and you're going there with the sales or the account team, if you don't understand how the account team is compensated, you're going to have a great deal of trouble predicting who will help you and support you, and who will be sort of indifferent to what you're doing. And it's actually as complicated a topic as any engineering or technical topic I've had to absorb, is the sort of compensation details. And you don't have to get down to the nitty gritty details, but you do need to understand what kinds of things get people paid in that world and what kinds of things do not. Because you get a great deal of wind behind your sails when you're in alignment with the things that help them with their comp and their quota, and a great deal of friction when you're not. In fact, they will tend to want to insulate you from their client, because the initiatives that you're proselytizing are actually counter to what they're trying to achieve there. And I'm not trying to talk about any nefarious intent here, more just alignment about what the sort of approach of go to market and sell the product, get it installed, get it deployed, et cetera, et cetera. How that really all works. And as you get to higher levels, you do tend to naturally become exposed to much more. Marketing will come to you to help with technical veracity of the content they want to say, and that'll be interesting. My boss has a term he uses called pathological truth telling, and what he means by that is not that you should lie, but really that you should think about how you're communicating with people, and starting out with the deepest detail for most audiences is not the way to start out, even if that's all the sort of things that you revel about the technology, is the complexity and the technical virtuosity of some of the solutions. That probably is not necessarily the way that you're going to lead with when you're talking to another CTO or a CIO, for sure, who, as I learned to my, I guess, astonishment, is for the most part more of a business role than it is a technology role. Most CIOs, certainly lots of exceptions, but most CIOs are not themselves deep technologists, but they're immersed in the business and the business value of technology.
Right, that's pretty good. Now, second of all, I want you to briefly touch base on these different job roles that you've been through. So, let's say first one would be I don't even know if it's a job role or not. So please correct me if I'm wrong there. So being an IBM fellow, then second of all, being a VP, and then third of all, being a CTO. So like, is there some sort of a correlation between these three titles? And what are some of the responsibilities and are the distinctions between each one of these three?
Sure. So in IBM at least, the IBM fellow role, which I think IBM is the company that invented this notion of a fellow, a company fellow as a technical, and it's sort of a politically incorrect term that comes from the 60s, because there's no gender requirement to be a fellow. But in fact, that's the highest technical level in the company. So that is normally achieved through technical virtuosity, leadership, and influence within the company, and also on industry. So, there are also IBM fellows who are Turing Award winners or Nobel Prize winners. I'm not one of those, but in general, those are for pure technology contributions. But of course, in the IBM setting, pure technology contributions that have no business impact are much less interesting. So there is definitely when you are constructing your IBM Fellow package, which is a long process, and you have only a small part in it. There's a lot of other people who are involved in creating and I guess evangelizing it. But um, a lot of what you're trying to describe is what is the business impact of the technology contributions and insights and innovations that you've made in your relevant part of your career. So that's kind of the culmination, if you like, in the technical career. And in IBM, there are both the technical and the non-technical, or the manager line management career path, and you are definitely allowed and encouraged to go back and forth. And I would say for many people, almost everyone starts out in the technical career path. It's not quite as true now as it used to be, but almost everyone starts out in that technical career path, and then at some point they move into management for whatever reasons. They hopefully because they show a set of talents there that would lead them to be successful managers and good people managers as well. And then you may move back and forth. So for me, I've moved back and forth. Before I became an IBM fellow, I was operating as basically a director. I didn't have that title, but I had the same executive level as a director so leading about a 300-person organization that was developing a set of compiler products that were organized around a technology theme. And then I moved back out of that role to become the pure CTO of that area in pursuit of this IBM Fellow designation, which at that time, not so true now, but at that time was not really available if you were also a line manager. And that had been kind of, as soon as I found out about that program, I sort of admired many people that I'd met along the way who were IBM fellows and wanted to be like them. Not that I particularly thought, oh, I got to be an IBM fellow, but more that I saw the things that they were doing and working on, and the influence they had, and that appealed to me as a goal. And so, at some point it became within reach, and in fact, I did achieve that. So many times IBM fellows become CTOs of the technology areas where they themselves are deep, subject matter experts. And the CTO is, of all those three-letter, acronyms of the boardroom, I would say that's the least well defined and one that has the most sort of variable formulation. So you can find CTOs that have no direct employees, that are only responsible for architecture and technology direction of some kind of a group, and you can find other ones that own all of operations and technical development for a company. And so there's no consistency, I find, in that title per se. In my role now, I have both hardware and software development, but it's very different from the CTO role that I had in the early 2000s. That was a deep technology role. I could walk into any of the code bases that I was working on or that I was leading pretty much and be effective, insightful about those code bases because I was familiar with them. Now, I mean, realistically, I'm not telling, the hardware people that are, putatively under my CTO responsibility, I'm not telling them how to write their VHDL. We're talking at a much higher level. So it's a much more diluted sort of a breadth role, I think, than it has been in the past. Now the VP one came about as a kind of a different scenario where it just came to be that my boss's biggest need was for someone to lead a 1,200 person organization that no longer had a VP to lead it. That's a longer story, but and I was the one who, I guess, didn't already have 1,200 people and had some experience leading large teams, and so I was more like a pinch hitter in that scenario. But it was a pinch hitter for over 6 months, and I would say a great learning experience. I would encourage anybody to overcome the butterflies in your stomach about all the parts of it that you've not done before, and really jump in and embrace learning about it. You will get a lot of help, and you'll learn a lot along the way. You learn a lot about how the business really operates, about a lot of the processes and so on that are part of the business. And it's, I think, left me now, as I've left that role, a much more insightful CTO. And if I would just, say one little piece of advice to people, it is good to take a stint in management if that can be an opportunity for you. And for people that can become a bit of a handful to manage, usually a stint in management fixes that when they sort of realize some of their own behaviors are actually making it very difficult on their own manager for no good reason, and really counterproductively to their own success. And so I think for people who I'm often want to characterize themselves as wild ducks, there are all kinds of good attributes of wild ducks. There are some others that just make them very difficult to manage, and sort of undermine their own success in the company. And I think a year in management as a first line manager, which is one of the hardest jobs in any company, in my opinion, usually fixes some of that sort of behavior pattern.
Right, that is actually very beautifully put. So I want to build on this thought for a bit that so for any of the cool technologies that we use today, there has to be extensive development or testing teams in the back end, like making sure that it works as seamlessly as it was once imagined. So considering that thought, what have you seen one of the, or maybe if you could mention a few of them, like the basic traits of a team that's successful over time, that delivers results, have fun, like general cool things about what do you think about a team that if it has those certain traits, it is meant to be successful over a sustained period of time.
Wow. There are a lot of things at work there, at play there. Of course, luck is a big part of anything.
Yes.
There's the saying, "It's better to be lucky than good." Awesome to be both.
Yes,
I've had
agreed.
I've had the fortunate to be both, a few times, but not all the time. And so, one of the things I would say it is a focus on customer, and not getting too attached to your own ideas about what things should be like. Of course, you want technical virtuosity. You want diversity of technical virtuosity as well, and diversity of thought. And I think one of the mistakes that's easy to make is to connect on to people who are like thinking. It's easy to work with people who think the same way, and can be very productive as long as what you're working on is the right thing. But sometimes some contrarian kind of people, I mean, that's how you might view them when you initially talking to them, that it's like they don't immediately agree with everything you say. Well, that can be a very useful attribute, and almost nobody has this kind of perfectly flat skill profile so that they're really good at every aspect of all the diverse things you need in order to bring a successful product to market. So you need that diversity of people who maybe they're not that great a developer, but maybe they're awesome at deploying the product at a client site, and going through a proof of concept, proof of technology, and really building the trust of the client such that they take it further and really embrace the product that you're creating. And there would be a lot of virtuoso engineers who would actually not be very good at that particular process. They'd be impatient with the client. They would um, we don't need to say all the things that would happen, but so I think it's early on, you've got to recognize that you need that diversity around you, and then figure out what you yourself are good at, and don't try to do everything. Of course, anything you do, try to do well, but I would say there's an overemphasis a lot of times that people put on addressing weaknesses. And, of course, if you have some catastrophic weakness, if you're unable to communicate with people, you've got to work on that. There are some fundamental things you have to be able to do. But I would say if you have a genuine weakness, try to play away from it. Because if you put yourself in a position where you're mostly working in an area that you're weak at, you're going to be unhappy. Your management or technical lead's going to be unhappy because you're not doing a very good job at it, probably. And while I think you can force yourself to do something that you don't like doing that much for 6 months or so, max, under maybe, emergency conditions, doing a career worth of that stuff is really not ideal. So I would say focus on your strengths, find jobs that are really value your strengths, and stick to that. Realize unrealized potential, absolutely. So just because you're not immediately good at something doesn't mean you can't become good at it. You may have some natural talents there, but nobody sort of walks onto a sports field playing a new sport for the very first time and expects to be world class, right? It doesn't happen that way. You have to practice, but you'll pretty quickly recognize whether you're just horrible at something and really unsalvageable, or whether you've got a lot of potential. And if you start improving very quickly, I think you'll find it appealing, and you'll know that this is something that you could do better. So maybe that's kind of a grab bag of stuff to answer your question, but um, that's kind of my reaction to it.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe one last thing that I want to talk about in this series of questions is about job titles. So, for instance, I've been really thinking about it lately. Let's say you have a solution architect, you have a senior solution architect, then you have a principal solution architect. But what I don't understand is, if someone becomes a principal solution architect, that itself, just by the words, it seems like it's a pretty senior position. Typically, there's only one principal, right? But then what was the need of creating like an associate principal, then a senior principal, then a principal? Because what I didn't understand was that what was the need to divide a senior position into different senior positions? I don't know. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, I understand the point you're making. I think part of it is human nature. Humans want to have progression in their career, and it's probably, easier to tie certain elements of comp and other aspects, to those things. It's also a way to show some progression of capability. So you probably don't just fly from being, kind of an individual contributor hacking code all day to suddenly designing, product architectures and, doing sort of higher level work. There's a progression of things. You do a bit of that and you show some talent for it, and then you do some more of it. And, so I think there is a logic to it as well, but I think for the most part, also, these things are very arbitrary in terms of what the titles mean. Within IBM, we have the same kind of thing where you sort of start out as an engineer, and then you can be an advisory engineer and a senior engineer and et cetera, or developer, software developer, and have all those different titles, and then suddenly you become a senior technical staff member, which everyone just shortens to STSM, and then you maybe become a distinguished engineer, and then you could become an IBM fellow. Those last three pretty well defined what the capabilities and the credentials need to be in order to achieve those. The other ones, I would say, are less clear.
So other than work talk exclusively, although we did talk about the culture at IBM, but if we talk about work traditions, I think they are a cool touch to our mundane lives at times. So, like, do you have any cool traditions in the team that you work with?
Um, we've had a number over the years. Post-COVID's a little bit of a tough time. I think we're all trying to sort of reground ourselves in what those things are. But I think you have to have, the actual shape and flavor of it, or the details of it, can be different. But you need to have some, in my opinion, some kinds of activities that are outside of work, and that don't um, that aren't about work, that aren't about um, anything to do with work, but are all the people that you work with as a team, and where it's okay to talk about work because that's what you have in common. So, what doesn't qualify for this, I mean, these are great things to do, is where everybody and their significant other kind of goes out for dinner together. That can be great, and nothing wrong with that. But if what happens is that all the people only have their IBM or wherever they work career in common, and all the significant others don't, and this will quickly be very uninteresting for the significant others to attend or do. And so I think it misses the point. If you have a more social interaction that's absent of all this work talk, then great. So the things that we've done in the past are things like, at the end of the day, we'll invite everybody to, there's a common situation, it seems, where I think just in the broader world around December, big blockbuster movies get their premiere. And so we would try to find a premiere. We did all the Lord of the Rings movies. We did some of the James Bond movies, some Star Wars movies over about 20 some years. We'd focus on going to the premiere. So it has a kind of an appeal to it. And we'd actually just rent the whole theater at like 10:30 in the morning, or maybe even earlier. So there's nobody else there. It's just us. And we get this special showing of a movie that no one's seen. Now the trick there becomes not everybody's interested in Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or whatever it might be, but we tried to find something that had more mass market appeal, and that I thought was a very successful kind of event, only on a yearly basis. And in the summer we would do picnics and things like that, just to try to get everybody out, take an afternoon off of work, so do it on work time. That's the other thing I think that makes it work well. If you're not giving up your free time to do this stuff, because then it can become a conflict. People who are just with new children are not going to want to give up their that time. That's when their soccer practice is, or they just need to get childcare or something like that, or or people who are maybe later on in their lives have other different kinds of responsibilities. So if you can make sure that you do it during work time, I think those are very successful things. So those are some of the things that we've done, just to try to build a little, I think, sense of community
Right,
in the team.
a certain sense of belonging, I'd say.
Right. And you get, I think, even if you're sort of looking at this from a very pure bottom line perspective in the company, there's a lot of collateral benefits that derive from these kind of events, and they come from just teams that don't necessarily spend much time talking to each other about stuff, and they'll discover some synergy, some cool idea, and suddenly you'll find out some patent gets filed between the two of them, or some skunk work starts, that they start creating some technology together, or build some kind of productivity tool that helps both those teams be more effective, whatever it is. So
Right.
those kind of
Yeah.
things are hard to predict and hard to count on, but they definitely happen in those contexts.
Right. That
So
is
I think it's
pretty
very
cool.
valuable.
So other than that, Kevin, I want to talk about core values for a little bit. What are some of the core values that have really lasted your professional life, and something that you really uphold in your personal life as well?
um, I think work ethic is the main one. It's especially as you get more and more senior, people will look to you for your advice and counsel, for your sort of off the cuff reaction to new technology, and so you know you got to take this stuff seriously and put in the work to understand deeply, especially when you're in like a breadth like mine. Um, no one's going to come and force you to learn this stuff. So you've got to kind of have that work ethic that says, figure this stuff out. Go hack around with a Kubernetes control plane. Get some experience with it, whatever it might be. And so um, that's the same kind of advice I would give other people. Don't try to take shortcuts. Do the hard work, and remember that if you're thinking about all of the things that you're proud that you know and are good at, how many of those honestly came from book learning? The germ of them might have come from that. Your interest in them might have come from that. But if you're really good at something and you're considered, say, an industry SME, or even within your own team an SME, it's probably because you did a lot of that work yourself. So as soon as you start trying to skip that part, I think you're sort of finished. So I would say that's part of it. The other is just, comes down to integrity and personal credibility. I think Simon Sinek has posted some things about why Navy SEALs how they deal with people who are extremely high performers, and what do they value in a team. And what he points out is that they place an extremely high value on trust and reliability and responsibility to others. And I think that a lot of people who are sort of virtuoso personal contributors can forget about that part. And so, their admonition is, we would rather have a person of lesser overall capabilities who we can trust and count on 100% than someone who's far more capable but who's a bit flaky on the trust point, whose ethics stray, who are a little bit perhaps more self-absorbed or self-centered and not really pulling for the whole team, like those kind of things. So I think that kind of credibility, your own reputation, um, so easy to lose, so hard to win back if you've ever lost it. So it's something you really need to keep at your core, and that, I think, is just true of life. I don't think that's anything specific or fundamental to the technology issue, industry. But there are some in my career early on. I saw some pretty interesting, I would say, management discipline. It's a tough topic. People who are let go, who were the strongest people on the team, but they had other habits and other behavior patterns, especially in today's day and age. That was not a kinder, gentler age 30 years ago in terms of people's behavior in the workplace and their use of language and respect for the individual at times. Even in those days, people would actually take that tough step, and I saw the whole team become more productive in the absence of that most capable person, because that most capable person was a sickness, was a cancer on the team, because of their behavior patterns, because they were diminishing, demeaning people, because they were talking them down rather than bolstering them up, because they were, not supporting them, because they were abusive, frankly. And that's an extreme example, but you don't have to go to that extreme example to see the value that comes from having this kind of integrity and credibility around those core values. So that's kind of where I stand on it.
Yeah, I think those are pretty good reflections, to be honest. It gives a lot to think about. Now that we're reaching the end of our conversation, Kevin, we'll end on an advice from you for early career professionals as well as students. What are some of your reflections from your career that you would want them to do, and what would be something that you would rather tell people not to do?
Um, well, you're going to make a big transition when you leave university life and go to the workplace. And as much as they try in university to um, coach and pattern on some kind of team-based activities, I think we've all been in that team-based activity at school where um, somebody doesn't pull their weight very much and everyone's going to get the same mark, so everybody else pitches in, or maybe one person does all the work and other people's let you. So that can become a frustration. And when you get to the workplace, you get there on all of your own individual contribution. Your marks are your achievement, your degree, all of the work you've done, that's your achievement. Now you're suddenly thrust into a team where it's the team's success. Of course, you're going to be evaluated on your contributions, but ultimately, it's going to be very difficult to do well if the team doesn't do well. And so you've got to pretty quickly, and you're going to be likely the youngest one there. So any sense of entitlement you kind of bring into that environment will not serve you well. So I would say, think about being more a servant practitioner than an entitled practitioner, and just do the work. Honestly, I say that a lot to people. There's no shortcut for a lot of stuff. Do the work. It'll come, but do the work. And in my opinion, if I would say, some of the derailments I see in early career, some of it's around these generations are not all the same. They have different expectations, they have different desires and ambitions. And to the extent that companies kind of realize that and put programs in place to be more, well, not to cater them to them particularly, but to at least embrace some of the different ideas that generation has, and therefore get the value of that diversity of thought. But for the most part, the derailment that I see is people come in and it's like, I've already been here 18 months. Why haven't I been promoted? Like, do the work, you know. It'll happen. You'll have the impact. I mean, of course, there can be situations where, inequity is popping up, but in general, do the work and be focused on your own work. You know, if you're watching what other people are doing and what other people are getting, you're getting distracted from the real way to achieve. And if someone was hired at the same time as you and perhaps gets promoted before you get promoted, I mean, unless you know an awful lot about everything that's going on, all of the credentials they had coming into this job and skills that they had, the exact work they were given to do, all of that stuff, you're not really in a position to judge that. So I would say just put it out of your mind, concentrate on what you need to do in order to get that promotion, because there's so many people I've seen that they enter the workforce and perhaps they most of the work that they did in their education um, was based on a certain set of technologies, and they move into an area in the new company that they work with where there's not so much, they don't have so many skills that are ready to go. They have to do a lot of learning. Maybe they're working on a legacy system. They went to school, they were working in Node, or they were working in Java using VS Code. Well, now they come into a legacy job at a bank, and they're working on the green screen with 10 million lines of COBOL. There's a lot of learning to go on there, right? And they can sometimes be frustrated by someone who lands and does a bunch of stuff quickly and they get that first promotion. Well, that doesn't mean they're more, upward ultimate potential than you. It just means they may have landed with some more skills that were immediately relevant. Like maybe they already knew how to code in COBOL. Maybe they already knew how to write JCL and do a bunch of other crazy mainframe things that are from the 60s. For some other, they had a co-op term somewhere where they learned that stuff. You can't do that kind of compare. So to me, that's just a sort of a fool's errand to get distracted by some of these other elements. And I do see that a lot, though. People compare and they talk and they get themselves distracted from the real focus they should have, which is on developing themselves and their own career for the long term, like for their own ambitions.
Right. So we'll wrap the conversation up here, Kevin. Thank you so much once again for being here with us. We really appreciate your time. And as far as our audience are concerned, if you like the content, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to show your support. And until the next episode rolls out, take care of yourself and honestly, be consistent. You don't have to be 100% every day, but you got to be consistent. Keep showing up for what you believe in. This is your host, Usama, signing off, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you.